This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome, listeners, to Postcards from the Edge. I am your host, Amy Nelson, and I'm very excited because I have Wes Huntington with me again. Wes, welcome to Postcards.
Well, thanks, Amy. Thanks for having me on. It's been kind of like a snowy, cold few weeks here in Minnesota, so kind of excited to be doing this on a kind of a snowy day here in Minneapolis.
We have had some very cold temperatures, and I know I use the term with air quotes because I can't complain, especially to the likes of you, but we do have a lovely blue sunshiny day, so that makes me happy.
Yeah, it's snowy here.
Oh.
Ugh.
So you were last on a short treks, right?
Yes, I was on the first one, Runaway.
Yeah. So, and that was your favorite short trek?
Yeah, I found out that was actually my favorite one of the four. And then the second one, my second favorite was The Brightest Star.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. So, yes, welcome back. Thank you for doing this. And we are going to discuss Season 2, Episode 4, An Obol for Charon.
Yeah, it's
Did
close
I
enough.
say that right?
Close
Charon.
enough. Close enough.
Charon.
Charon, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So Wes was kind enough to make sure that I pronounced that correctly. So he's my universal translator this week.
Yeah. And I thought maybe we should probably get accurate as possible. So.
Yes. So listeners, if you would like to participate and share your response, please go to the Babel Conference. And that is our listeners group on Facebook. At the time of this recording, Wes, there were 395 comments, which is an 18% increase from last week.
Oh, boy.
I just don't know how we can keep increasing week after week. I'm like, oh, my goodness. But listeners, I love it. And I read all your comments. And I'm wondering, when are we going to have a percent decrease?
Ooh, I thought about this when I was reading this outline. And I thought, maybe after we finally get to Spock.
Oh, after? Because when Spock appears, you know it's going to
go up, but it's going to go up to 11, but still, I don't know, maybe towards the season finale, I don't know.
Yeah. So good job, listeners. Keep on posting. And I love reading them all. And so it's very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
So you've watched it, Wes, I'm sure.
Oh, yes.
And what was your initial response?
I have to say, this actually is my favorite episode so far of season 2.
Wow.
Because first it was New Eden, but then this episode overtook it.
My goodness, why?
Because it was very Star Trek. It was their first bottle show of the season. Granted, you can say Magic to Make a Famous Man Go Mad be its first bottle show ever of the series, but this was definitely a cost saving, I would say, kind of show. Because the first 2 episodes went over budget. That's well documented. But I have to say, this episode was phenomenal. Performances were through the roof, especially amongst Doug Jones and Sonequa Martin Green. I adored it. It was great. I loved it. It was Star Trek through and through. My favorite part, actually, is the whole Universal Translator going haywire.
Yes.
That was my favorite part. And we actually heard Andorian spoken for the first time in the franchise. So...
Yes, it was so good when I watched it. I mean, they just are having so much going on, which I really love because I loved last week and I love the 3 storylines and they're just throwing so much at you, so much to think. But you're right. This definitely had some Star Trek themes in it. And really, for the first time, I loved Tilly in this. And I know I'm late to the party because everyone has been loving Tilly, but Mary Wiseman's acting was, I mean, you're right. Everyone's acting just went up a whole nother notch. And she did an amazing job. And I'm loving what they're doing with her character now and what she gets to do and how involved she is with the storyline. So.
Yeah, I that does not say much too. I mean, I love like I said before on the Runaway short postcards. I said that I love Mary Wiseman, and this definitely. I agree with you, Amy, 100%. I think her acting went up to 11, especially when she did the whole May voice. That was creepy.
It was. I got the chills. I was like, oh, she ain't fooling around now. That May is serious. And Mary Wiseman's acting, like you could tell it was a completely different character. And I was very, very impressed.
Yeah. And then we can't forget about Jet Reno.
Yes.
I have to say this much. Jet Reno is definitely the bones of engineering.
Yes.
I got a lot of vibes of McCoy from her, especially in this episode. So, talking about fixing it with duct tape.
Yes. I've already seen the memes out there.
Yes, I have too.
Well, let's get to what the listeners had to say. So, Wes, why don't you start us off?
All right. James Wilson says, great episode. It was an emotional roller coaster. Must have more number 1. Yeah, I did a recent episode of a different podcast, and most of the complaints were addressed to number 1 because she was in there for about 2.5 minutes, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But she will be back. Rebecca Romaine will be back.
Yes. So we will have more. That's for sure. All right. Nerdy Gal 33. Thank you for our Twitter comments as well. Says, huge emotional episode. The scenes between Michael and Saru had me crying, and the very caring friendship between Stamets and Tilly touches my heart. Lastly, number 1 needs a name. I love her, but please hope they give her a name. Well, thank you, Nerdy Gal. And yes, again, we've got this emotional, roller coaster going through. And yeah, I teared up, and that's unusual for me.
Yeah, and she says that number 1 needs a name. I'm pulling for Major Una.
Yes.
So I'm pulling for that one because it honors the novels and also honors Major Barrett Roddenberry. So
yes.
Christian Alonso says, this may be my favorite episode yet. Number 1 was superb. The relationship between Burnham and Saru is proof of the power of love and forgiveness. Major Tom with Stamets and Tilly was the best moment. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. Amazing.
Yes. I had to ask Major Tom. I'm like, wait, no, that was Reno in, but apparently that's the song David Bowie reference.
Yeah, it's a song for David Bowie, Space Oddity. A Space Oddity. So, okay. Yeah, that one went right over my head. I do not know David Bowie's music at all. I mean, I'm lucky I know the name. So, thanks. Did you watch the Carpool Karaoke episode?
Yes. And I didn't know that song either. I was like, what are they singing?
They sang it in that episode of Carpool Karaoke.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. All right. Well, I guess I need to bone up on my David Bowie there. Rob Vaughn says, holy bleep, another great episode. And again, it felt like old school Trek. Actor Doug Jones and Sonequa Martin Green gave an acting master class. And how cool to see most of the bridge crew in the briefing room need more number one. Well, we're definitely getting this number one, and we want to see more of her.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get more of her. And I like the fact that she has habanero sauce, but that was an interesting choice. But yes, definitely felt like old school Trek. Definitely. Legacy Trek Podcast says, on the whole, this episode was awesome. Lots of emotional impact from the first appearance of number one and her not letting Spock go without a fight, to the Saru-Burnham dynamic, to Stamets singing to Tilly. This may be heresy to some, but Jet Reno is falling flat to me.
Well, thank you, Legacy Trek Podcast. Nice to have you following us on Twitter. And I commented with the whole Jet Reno thing because I wasn't on board. The first time we saw her, I was like, what's going on? It just seemed so out of character. And I heard that she was a comedian. So I saw her comedy show on Netflix. And although I didn't like it, it helped me to understand who Tig Notaro was. And so now I'm on board with her.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool that how she got the role, too, because she's known Alex Kurtzman for 2 decades. Yeah, she had said that, I think, from one of those videos that they had on the Facebook page for Discovery. So, yeah, it's kind of cool that she knew Alex Kurtzman for 2 decades before she pretty much was asked, do you want to play in Star Trek? And he said yes. So
Karen Chuplis says, I was so riveted I could barely breathe. And I actually real life cried, which people always talk about, but I don't usually do. I'm with you, Karen. And I'm so emotionally wrung out. I want to watch it again immediately, but I emotionally can't yet. I'm not going to say it was perfect. And I know some people are going to rip it to shreds, but they are doing something right because I felt like I just went through a huge life-changing journey. Stamets and Tilly are magic together. Michael and Saru about killed me, and the scene with the song about killed me. The whole universal translator thing was amazing in my opinion. Linus speaks. I don't know, guys. I'm not coherent, but I also think I kind of loved it. Well, Karen, thank you for your comments. And yes, I teared up, and I like you, do not usually do things like that for TV shows.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I mean, I didn't necessarily tear up at the Michael Saru scene in Saru's quarters, but I mean, I definitely felt the emotional impact of it, definitely. And then when I was watching it, it reminded me of TNG's Ethics, in which Riker is asked by Worf to kill him when he has that injury. So, that back injury. So, it reminded me of that very much so, but I got the emotional impact out of the whole thing. So I didn't cry, but I got the whole emotional impact. Okay. Maribel Myers says, I have to watch it again tomorrow. I wish we'd been given a little more of number one. We got a dash when we wanted a big old scoop. Loved the Reno and Stamets banter. Yeah, I did. We got to see a little bit of the cranky Stamets from season 1, and heck, I missed him. Mary Wiseman was a powerhouse this episode. Can we clone her? While I love the Burnham and Saru dynamic, it seemed to come out of left field. We could have used a few breadcrumbs of their closer relationship before seeing Saru on his deathbed. We got a little bit more of the bridge crew. More, please. The universal translator malfunction was cool, and I enjoyed that bit of the story. I'd hoped we get more of Bryce with that part since he's our Uhura. Just seemed like a missed opportunity. Yeah, I like the malfunction of the universal translator. And I heard languages I haven't heard before.
Yeah, that was really cool. And Maribel, there was a great discussion on the Babel conference talking about when her comment of breadcrumbs for the closer relationship with Burnham and Saru. You know, because there in season 1, there was some animosity and jealousy and, you know, but I think we got to see more of them getting closer together at the end of season 1. But yeah, it could have used a little more screen time to let us know how close of friends they actually did become.
Yes, I agree. And I have to say, I have to agree on that.
Yeah. Chris Chaplin says, the narrative symmetry is wonderful in Obol for Charon. Both Saru and the sphere seek to pass on their experience, their external and internal discoveries. And both characters get moments of resolution through empathy. Burnham empathizing with Saru, Saru empathizing with the sphere. I love that empathy in language and passing on one's story is the central action of the episode. Is that not story resting in the tradition of Trek? The sphere is the probe from the inner light. The spatial distortions in Twisted and Benny Russell and Trek's dozen of writers over its life. All of these are passing on stories about who we are and who we want to be. I'm sorry I'm so long, but this is pure sci-fi Star Trek with something worthwhile to say. Saru is up there with Spock and Data as emblematic characters of Trek. They strive to become more than what they are with vigor and intention, yet their alienation is so relatable. It's a great tension to have and some great characters. Chris, thank you. And yes, the symmetry of the stories was so beautiful and so just executed so well.
Yes, I agree 100%. And Andrew Colville and Andy, what's his name? McElroy did a great job of melding the story very, very well, who are the writers of the episode. So they did really, really good job with that. And I got the whole Spear the Probe from the Inner Light thing. Yeah, definitely. 100,000 years old. So yeah. I got the whole Inner Light thing. That was great. Christopher Ellis Osterbrock, I think I pronounced that right. He says, just finished. I've been wanting to discuss the seemingly provenance in the Ren Angel Signal stuff. The issues of faith is key to that whole story. I have a doctorate in biblical spirituality, and I'm a theologian and Puritan historian. They write so much on providence, determinism, God's existence outside of time, and how temporal beings could comprehend such. Typical DS9 emissary stuff, right? I was hoping they'd bring it up, but the episode stood firm on its own. Very TOS/TNG. Then Pike name-dropped the DSS, and I had to chuckle and not read too much into that. I mean, has the Spear seen history through a different lens to either confirm or correct what our Trek timeline has known? In my opinion, best DSA episode yet. The Saru tie-in with the short was incredible, and I hope we make it back to the Kelp Harvesters this season.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. And I love that you are a theologian and a historian and wanted to include that because I think, as we've been told, this season 2 is having these themes, these spiritual themes and cultural and how it is. And you're right, bringing in like DS9 emissary, like that's it. You know, who are these prophets? Are they, aliens in the wormhole? Or are they prophets? And I think it's very interesting to take a look at that.
Yes, and definitely that's a thing that we all struggle with in our society. I think, how we meld the science and faith. That's been around for centuries. Yes, so yeah, and definitely, like I agree with the best Discovery episode yet, and everything else. So.
Michael McGovern says this was a great episode, and season 2 is knocking it out of the park. This episode marvelously combined multiple Star Trek tropes into one riveting and touching hour. We've seen the Ship in Danger episode before. We've seen the New Life Form episode before. And we've seen the Spock Odo Dr. Data is Dying episode before. This episode brought something new to each of these storylines, mainly through the character dynamics and relationships that they've been building on this season. The crew is really working together, and now we're seeing the love and friendship they all have for each other, and plenty to chew on as to where these storylines go next. And again, the production value is great. Great writing, great acting, great character development, great Star Trek. Michael, I could not agree with you more. It was amazing. And yeah, all of these storylines we've seen before, but it's so fresh, so new with the characters and how they are telling it for Discovery.
Yes, and I completely agree. Yeah, they have pretty much been knocking it out of the park with every episode, except for me with the last episode, but the one before. But yes, I completely agree with this comment 100%. Chris Trabuzio says, okay, so the reveal number 1, let us glued to the TV throughout her appearance to see if she's known by any other name. But alas, we're left stranded. The Burnham-Saru moments, which start at the bridge as everyone stands in solidarity of concern for not only their commanding officer but friend, was a really nice touch. Everyone's raving about Reno. I like the quip off, but the question remains. Is it too much comedy? I'm trying to accept the character with her quick quips, but I just don't know. That was a great little moment that the crew did. That, he says, okay, I gotta go, it's my time now. And, they all stood up. Even Pike did. And I thought that was great. That was a great little bit from the crew of the bridge crew.
Oh, yeah, that was definitely. Shoaib Mirza with a crying emoji. This week, my emotion chip was working overtime. You and me both, Shoaib. Saru and Michael's story was heartfelt, and they finally acknowledged the years of work experience and friendship as family. The sphere being story reminds me of Tin Man from TNG, Season 3, and Voyager's Elogium, Season 2, both featured spacefaring entities that influenced a crew member. I love the universal translator malfunctioning. Great universe building. What was going on with Tilly? Yikes, what a mystery. And I look forward to finding out what happened to her in the mycelium realm. Also, I hope we see Spock next week. The anticipation is killing me. A quick thought. The data dump by the sphere loaded 100,000 years of experience onto Disco's computer. Maybe this added intelligent leads to the AI we saw in Calypso. Shoaib, very interesting. I love that little comment and tie-in to Calypso.
Yeah, and I read this comment before, and I go like, maybe?
Interesting thought, huh?
Yeah, it really is an interesting thought. It really is. Yeah, and definitely everything else. I didn't think of Tin Man.
I know, that was great too. And I was like, yes, that is because Tin Man, he was so old and yes.
Yeah, I didn't think of Tin Man at all. That's great tie in there, Shoaib. Daniel Lopez Bongo, call me Daniel. Pure amazeballs. Sadness and sorrow, but still quintessential Star Trek-ness. A being there dying just wanting help from the ship and the crew. This one outdid itself in many ways, and in which Tilly and Saru were amazing. The 100,000 years of knowledge and experience might include knowledge of the Iconians before their passing, before their downfall, the rise and fall of successive empires, the falling of empires into obscurity until now. Now they are remembered once again, thanks to Burnham and Saru. I still subscribe to that the Red Angels are Iconians. Now, I don't think they are Iconians. The Red Angels are. So, and I'm glad that I was proven wrong about one theory I had about them. This week. But
all right. Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. It's, you definitely do get the vibe of Iconians, though, whether they are or not.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because Pike calls them the galaxy's Dead Street Scrolls.
Yes.
And I like that little tie into real life things. So that's kind of cool.
Nicholas Anastasiou says, well, Discovery knocks it out again for the 4th time in a row. Each of the plot lines felt like essential Star Trek. An incapacitated ship, a dying best friend and crewmate, an ancient spacefaring entity desperate to communicate, and an alien life form that possesses a main character. The themes also were Trek to the core, an unlikely friendship that grows stronger than family, The thirst for knowledge and understanding, compassion over self-preservation. This would be an episode I'd show my son if he were still a child and tell him, aspire to each and all of these people. I especially love this season how Discovery is also able to balance telling a serialized story with self-contained episodic plots, the best of both worlds. Well, I agree with you, Nicholas. I do like the self-contained stories that still yet continue the overall arc of this season.
Yeah, and that's one thing they actually were striving for when they were producing this season was making kind of like have the overall story of the Red Angels and the Science and Faith thing, but also have stories that, are self-contained, but also kind of tie into what's going on. So I like that. And it's kind of like, if I want to say this, I want to tie into Enterprise, season 3, because they had the overall story with the Xindi, but then they also had some self-contained stories in that season. So definitely, I think they found the right balance that, for my opinion, that plagued the first season. It was the overall story. This time, they're actually making it accessible to everybody, which is a good thing.
Well, and it's been interesting because I know some people like yourself didn't really care too much for last week's episode, but I think you sort of need that balance. I understand last week's episode was just pure getting the story out there, and it wasn't self-contained. You couldn't watch last week's episode unless you knew previous things. But the one before that and this one, so it's almost been every other one that is like, all right, let's do a little self-contained. All right, let's do smash. Here's the whole story arc, thrown into an episode and 3 plot lines and stuff like that. So I like that it's going so far back and forth like that. And I think it is a give and take that, you can't have these, bottle episodes and still have it serialized. So it is definitely a balance that I think they are working and being successful at, in my opinion.
I completely agree with you, Amy.
All right. Well, on that note, let's get to the segment I have called Bits and Pieces. Mark Rodriguez says, first reason to like this episode, Reno's mention of Prince.
I smiled when she said that because obviously I'm from Minnesota, so it was a great little tie-in to Prince because, he was born and raised here. So it was a great little tie-in to Minnesota there. That was a great little reference there.
So how when you're watching a TV show and then something just pulls you out, that pulled me out of the episode. I was all glued, all in, and then it was like, whoop, just pulled right out of the episode. And I was like, why did they have to mention that? I don't know. I didn't care for it. I get it, but is that classical music? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I get it too. I understand your point, Amy. Don't get me wrong, but I smiled a little bit when I heard it. So when Jet Reno said that line, so Chris Foster says this episode may provide an answer to something I have wondered about since the TNG days. When we see Captain Picard's love of archaeology and all the empires referenced that we now know about, such as the Iconians, Croans, and the Khan Empire, how do we get so many details? Even with our friends in the Federation, they were talking about civilizations that existed before anyone we know today. How do we find out so many details? Their name, their language, their social structures. This may be the moment that set it all up. This Rosetta Stone. Yeah, I didn't really thought about that.
I know, Chris. Thank you so much for commenting. I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, we know there's, historians and stuff, but to have so much information for Picard and everyone to do and, love archaeology, like it sort of sets it up. Like now we have all this information and Pike says, Starfleet's going to be going through these records for, hundreds of years.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense.
Yep.
It does.
I love how the writers are doing it. And I love how smart our fans are.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Christopher D. Littlefield says, I really have to add that Saru's testimony about being an immigrant really touched me in this episode, especially with all of today's heated political rhetoric surrounding those who move to other places in search of a better life. In my opinion, this was the most successful and poignant message of the entire episode. Well, thank you, Chris, for mentioning that. And definitely we do get that vibe, of immigrants and leaving for a better life. And Saru chose that. And now look at him. He was already successful in Starfleet. And now with his threat ganglia removed that no one in his species or planet would have thought possible, like now we get to see what's past that. And I think that's great. And he is going to have an even more better life.
Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of curious to see where it's going to go. I'm really curious because, this is something that they've never any Kelpie has ever experienced. So I thought I'm kind of curious to see what's going to go on. And I didn't really put the two things together that he said about the current political rhetoric of immigrants and stuff like that. I didn't really put two and two together until I read this comment. So now I can see it a little bit differently when I watch that scene again in the future.
Yeah. And, Star Trek is always making social commentaries, and this may be one.
Yeah, it was very subtle, but it was there.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Something to think about, which we love that Star Trek makes us think.
Yes, definitely. Yuan Krushenk? I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. The episode just keeps getting better. The anticipation and excitement I get looking forward to each new episode takes me back to being a teenager waiting every week for a new DS9. Best bit about this episode? Commander Nan and her disco version of the scant. Yes. Disco version of the scant. Yes, it was there. It was there for like 10 seconds, but it was there.
I don't even know if it was there for 10 seconds because I read this comment and I was like, Ewan, what are you saying? And then on my rewatch, I was like, oh, there it is. I think it was literally 3 seconds. And I was like, all right, Ewan is right.
It was there. It was, and I didn't even notice until TrekCore had mentioned it.
Oh.
On Twitter. And I was like, my goodness. And this is actually the first Prime version of it. We had the kind of like the scant for the Mirror Universe costumes in season 1.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the first time we actually see it in the Prime universe for the disco uniforms. So that was kind of a nice little subtlety.
Yes. Janessa Chiharda, tiny nitpick. The Amazon captions are incorrect about Burnham speaking Mandarin. She was speaking Cantonese, but Saru answers in Mandarin. So with that universal translator, Janessa, thank you for bringing that out.
And I think CBS All Access was wrong too then, because I watched it with the closed captioning on CBS All Access, and it said Mandarin for both Burnham and Saru. So.
All right. Well, here on Postcards, we don't always read the positive. We do get into some questions and concerns. So, Wes, why don't you start us off? Cahal Fitzgerald.
Cahal Fitzgerald says, help! This is the first episode of Disco that I did not care for so much. My main complaint is the centerpiece between Saru and Michael. The bond feels unearned at this point. That makes sense. We have simply not seen enough of them on screen to be sharing emotional ups and downs. It felt like a season 6 scene. It was just too soon. Further, the flip from goodbye, I'm dying to I've never felt better gave me whiplash. The main planet plot was a little crazy even for sci-fi. And the line about its last action to save them was the first time I felt the earnestness and emoting was too over the top. I really liked the interaction between Stamets and Jet, that the whole caper with Tilly and the mycelial network was too erratic. The show still looked great, and I'm hoping this is just a blip. I see your point regarding the centerpiece scene between Saru and Michael. I think we've only got to know them for how long now? 19 episodes, and we're getting this now. Like you said before, they were kind of like animosity towards her last season, but now this season is a little different. And we haven't really been too emotionally invested in these characters yet, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And, Cahal, I do agree that it was like, oh, I'm dying and I'm sick and I can barely walk, and hand on his hip and, leaning over. And it just, you could see, thanks to actor Doug Jones, he was dying. It was terminal. And I think also his brain was telling him that he was dying, like his thought process. And then when the ganglia fell off, it was very quick that I've never felt better. I'm fine. And, so I get that, but I think maybe his brain might have helped that transition. Thoughts really are powerful. And when now you believe that you're not going to die, you're going to, have that complete transformation and outlook on life.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right. Our own CBJ, Chris Jones, says, I thought the episode was structurally a mess and the writers need to find some restraints as well as pick something to focus on. You can't have 3 A-plots in the same episode, abandon your original setup to wedge those 3 plots in, and then emerge from a cluttered mess you create only to give the viewer a 9-minute coda that explains the choice of episode title, but is so stylistic jarring compared with the rest of the episode that you feel you are watching a different episode altogether. I was just left saying, okay, as the credits rolled. I thought this was one of Discovery's weakest efforts as far as the amazing, powerful masterpiece that seems to be the popular opinion. So interesting. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your comments on Postcards. They definitely, the number of plots going on each of these episodes, I've heard some complaints about, and I can understand.
Yeah, I can understand what he's saying. Don't get me wrong, I do. But, I thought this was a masterpiece. So
yeah.
Kevin Sargent says, as much as I liked the episode, and I really did, I'm totally confused about what happened to Saru's ganglia. What exactly caused them to fall out? It obviously was a phenomenon he was totally unfamiliar with. Clearly it's related to the sphere, but there's no explanation given. I should be like Max and not care, but unfortunately it bugs me. And Tony Salazar says, I'm a little fuzzy on the whole Kelpian ganglia thing, but if I understand correctly, when they're about to fall off, Kelpians get sick and they either ritually chop them off and die, or the sufferers are taken by the Baul during the culling. We can see Saru has a major change in attitude and demeanor. So it seems to me that the Baul take them to keep them from changing and keeping the population docile. But why?
So some definite questions about this whole ganglia thing. And I mean, we don't know how long the Kelpians have been a species. And you're telling me that not one person before Saru has made it past this and that had their ganglia fall out. Like I understand your questions, Kevin and Tony.
Yeah, I do too. And, the whole ganglia thing, I just want to tie in back to season 1. Why didn't Michael just, get grossed out by it? Because she got grossed out by the ones in the mirror universe, so.
Yeah. Dan McWilliams says, this episode was once again an incredible and exceeding all my expectations in terms of intrigue, drama, and science fictionery. The near-death scene with Saru was fantastic, and I really felt for them. But I only wish they kept up the emotion after the moment when he realizes he's okay. I felt like it dropped back down to almost, oh, well, that's interesting level. Come on, he was about to die, and he didn't. Give us some cheers. Bring in some of the crew members to celebrate for a few minutes, something. So again, sort of that whiplash of, oh, he's going to die, and that amazing. It was so emotional. And then to just say, oh, I'm fine. I see your point, Dan.
Yeah, I do see your point too. But maybe you're going a little bit too over the top by having the crew members come in and cheering. Maybe it's a little bit over the top by your suggestion, but just a little bit over the top, but it makes sense. I mean, yeah, it could have just been going on just a little bit longer, and it would have been just fine.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, let's get to our final thoughts. And I have one final thought I'd like to share, and this is from our good friend, Brandon Shea Mutella. He says, this episode was really great. Science problem? Check. Unknown alien? Check. Communication with unknown alien? Check. Moving past your preconceptions? Check. Engineering technobabble solution? Check. Character growth? Check. Star Trek? Check, 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 check. I agree, Brandon. You just listed off all the things in Star Trek that we love. So yes, check that off. This episode meets it.
I completely agree. I definitely agree with you, Brandon. Definitely, 100%.
So, Wes, how do you think that the fans responded to this week's episode?
In my opinion, I think they reacted pretty good, despite some issues regarding the whole Baru. I would say Baru for some reason. Saru and Burnham relationship. Other than some issues with that, they made things. This is definitely a home run from Discovery, first and foremost. And I've actually had to say that if they don't give Emmy Awards for this episode, it's a travesty. And that's my opinion.
Yes, the acting was amazing. You know, it's when I put together these comments and, you know, we get to the point that's, you know, questions and concerns, because I do like to, you know, make sure it's well-rounded. I had to really search for these, I think it was 4 comments, and which normally I don't have to search because I'll usually find them. It's like, oh, this is definitely going in the negative section, you know. I really did have to search, and you can see sort of the ones were just more of like questions, not really, I didn't like it. So I think the fans responded quite well to this episode. So I think it's great. And you know, compared to season 1, my questions and concerns were a lot longer segments. But I think this season 2, overall, everyone is really loving it, and especially this episode.
Yeah, and I think for season 2, I think that the writers and producers are actually trying to address what went right and what went wrong for season 1. So I think by the end of the season, everything's going to be fixed. You know,
and I see your point, and I know that in season 2 that they had already, you know, even before they were finished with season 1, had known that they were going to, you know, have a shift and a change of tone. But I do agree that they have listened to the fans. I mean, you have to. We are the demand, you know, and you're not going to be able to create unless you know, meet some of the demands. And I think as in any good production or any good person, you are going to self-evaluate. And so making changes is always a good thing and something that we should aspire to do in our own personal lives.
I completely agree. And that's why I said, and I'm glad that they're addressing many of the concerns many fans had for season 1. So I'm glad they have it.
Well, be sure to check out our Discovery coverage. Live from the Edge airs on Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern, so you can watch Bruce and Brandy and ask questions live, and will be released as a podcast on Saturday mornings. Wes, have you had a chance to participate in the live discussion at all?
No, unfortunately, I haven't. I was going to join this past Friday, but I was called to an emergency co-hosting session for Brian Malash's podcast.
Oh, great.
I was called to emergency co-hosting because his co-host was sick. So he had to ask me to be with him discussing this episode of Discovery. So,
well, then you're getting a lot of
dose.
Discussion.
Triple dose.
Yep, that's about what I do every weekend.
That's okay. It's fine with me. The more the merrier.
Yeah. Well, listeners, it's fun. I've participated. I know sometimes it's difficult on a Friday night for those of you who have lives. I'm just kidding. But it is really fun to have that interaction. And so if you haven't done it, listeners, I would encourage it. It is really fun. Now we have our commentary that will be available as tracks from The Edge with the wonderful Mike and Max. And of course, you can catch full analysis on The Edge main show with Patrick and myself. You'll find all of these in the main feed for The Edge and in Trek.fm master feed. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Discovery, and the best place to do that is the Babel Conference. And that's where I collect your feedback for postcards from The Edge. You can also find us on Twitter at TrekFM or send us email using the contact form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select The Edge. And we have been getting some emails. Thank you so much, listeners, for taking the time to share with us your thoughts and concerns about how we're doing here on The Edge. So, Wes, where can people find you on the interwebs, and why don't you tell them about your own lovely podcast?
Okay. First of all, I'm very active on Facebook. I'm in the Babel Conference, so I do post there from time to time. I comment on pretty much every Postcards episode and every Earl Grey episode because you guys do feedback for both of those shows.
Thank you.
But then for my podcast, it is twice a week, usually released around midnight Central Time, which is my time zone. And I do everything regarding Star Trek. I will be doing an episode for an Obol for Charon. But I've also done episodes about, recent episodes about Enterprise. I did other things as well. And so check me out. Those
are released on Mondays and Fridays.
Correct. Mondays and Fridays. Yeah. Mondays and Fridays twice a week. Just one at the beginning of the week and one at the end of the week. So it's kind of nice there. Try to get like an hour of me. But you can find me on Facebook page, facebook.com/MN Star Trek Nerd Pod. And the Twitter handle is MINNST Nerd Pod.
All righty. You can find me here on the network where I co-host The Edge main show with Patrick Devlin. I also co-host Earl Grey, as you mentioned, with Richard and Justin, and that is about the next generation. You can also find me on the Fandom Podcast Network where I co-host Discoville, and we discuss the Orville and Discovery with my good friends Haley Stoddart, Kyle Wagner, and Kevin Reitzel. You can find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, but my favorite place is the Babel Conference. If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows going and even become an associate producer, visit patreon.com/TrekFM for all the details. And I would like to thank our current associate producers. They are Norman Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, Shoaib Mirza. Thanks for your comment this week. Richard Rutledge, James Muldrow, Cornelia Reutner, Ryan Mallett, and Chris Tribuzio. Thank you for supporting Trek FM and especially The Edge. Well, Wes, thank you for coming on Postcards. Another week of discovery and looking forward to the next one, right?
Yep, definitely. Saints of Imperfection, by the way, is the title.
Oh, excellent. So join us next week for another episode of Postcards from The Edge. Hailing frequencies open.